She stood in the middle of the room, while 200 people watched her die inside. Not physically, but something in her chest cracked open the moment those words left his mouth, cold, deliberate, loud enough for the people nearest them to hear. "You've always been a placeholder, Aveline, beautiful, temporary." She didn't move. She didn't breathe. She just stood there in her silk gown, holding a champagne flute she'd forgotten was in her hand, while Hartwell Crane, her husband of 12 years, turned back to his circle of admirers like he'd said nothing at all. Like she was nothing at all. And that was the moment something inside Aveline Cortes stopped breaking and started deciding. Her fingers found the clasp at the back of her neck. The diamond necklace, $80,000, a first anniversary gift, the thing he always pointed to when he wanted to remind her how much he'd given her, came loose in her hand. She set it on the nearest tray. Not thrown, not dropped, set down, gently, like she was finally putting something heavy to rest. Then she walked out of the Harborview Grand and into the rain. Drop where you're watching from in the comments. I want to see where this story reaches. She had no shoes on. She'd left them somewhere near the entrance. No coat, no phone, no money, no plan. Just the rain hitting her bare shoulders and the sound of her own heartbeat telling her to keep walking. She didn't know where she was going. She just knew she couldn't be in that room for one more second. Behind her, she heard heels on wet pavement. Aveline, stop." It was Cordelia, Hartwell's sister, the woman who had spent 12 years smiling at Aveline across dinner tables while knowing everything her brother did behind closed doors. "You need to come back inside," Cordelia said, grabbing her arm. "Do you have any idea what you just did? People saw you. This is going to be everywhere by morning." Aveline stopped walking. She turned slowly. "Let go of my arm, Cordelia. I'm trying to help you." "You have never helped me, not once, not in 12 years. Her voice was quiet, not angry, just done. "Now let go of my arm." Cordelia released her, and Aveline kept walking. She didn't have a destination, but the universe, or something like it, gave her one anyway, a warm light spilling from a small cafe across the street. A hand-painted sign above the door that read Oleander. Without thinking, she pushed it open. The woman behind the counter looked up. She was young, maybe 28, with kind eyes and the kind of face that didn't ask questions before it offered help. "Honey," she said softly, "you look like you need to sit down." Her name was Nadia, and she brought Aveline dry clothes, hot tea, and the first genuine silence Aveline had been offered in years. No demands, no performance, just warmth. Aveline sat at the corner table and let herself shake. She had been married to Hartwell Crane since she was 22 years old. She was 34 now. 12 years of waking up next to a man who made her feel invisible while making the rest of the world believe she was the luckiest woman alive. She thought about the $500 weekly allowance he gave her, her husband, worth $38 million, handed her $500 a week like pocket money for a child. She thought about the friends he'd quietly pushed out of her life, the phone he monitored, the doctor who'd looked the other way 2 years ago when she came in with bruised ribs and Hartwell stood right beside her, his hand on her shoulder, explaining that she'd had a fall. She thought about Lysette, Hartwell's current, and by no means only mistress, living in Charlotte while Aveline wore his last name and attended his charity galas and smiled for his photographs. She was so lost in her thoughts that she didn't notice the man who had come in from the rain until he was standing near her table. "I'm sorry to interrupt," he said. "My name is Rowan Voss. I was at the Harborview tonight. I saw what happened." She looked up. He was tall, maybe early 40s, with calm eyes and a stillness about him that felt entirely out of place in a city that never stopped moving. He wasn't dressed like the men at the gala, no suit, no tie, no performance. Just a dark jacket, dry somehow, and an expression that held no pity whatsoever. She hated pity, so the absence of it made her listen. "I'm not here to offer you sympathy," he said. "I'm here to offer you options." She stared at him. "I don't know you." "No, but I know Hartwell Crane. I've been watching him for a while." He sat down across from her, not with permission but not aggressively either, like a man who understood that some moments don't wait for invitations. "He has federal exposure on at least 3 properties in this state alone. What happened tonight, that's not the worst thing he's done. Not even close." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because men like your husband don't fear love," Rowan said. "They don't fear loss. They don't fear scandal. The only thing they fear is exposure. And right now, you are the person with the most to expose." Aveline looked at him for a long moment. "What exactly are you offering?" "A lawyer, a safe place to stay in Savannah tonight, and enough resources to make sure that when you walk into a courtroom, you don't walk in alone." She should have said no. She should have been suspicious. She should have done 100 things that made more practical sense than trusting a stranger in a cafe at midnight in the rain. But Aveline Cortes was tired of doing the sensible thing. The sensible thing had kept her in that marriage for 12 years. "Make the call," she said. Within 2 hours, Simone Delacroix was standing in the doorway of Nadia's cafe. Simone was a divorce attorney out of Colombia, the kind that opposing lawyers quietly dreaded. She walked in with a leather briefcase, reading glasses pushed up onto her head, and the focused energy of a woman who had heard every version of this story before and never once stopped being angry about it. "Before we say anything else," Simone said, setting down her briefcase, "I need you to know something. Whatever you tell me stays with me, and whatever he tries to do next, and he will try, we will be ready." What Aveline didn't know yet was that Hartwell had already moved. By the time Simone arrived, he had filed a missing person report with Charleston PD and was already feeding a story to a local journalist about his wife's emotional fragility and history of depressive episodes. A man who could call his wife a placeholder in front of 200 people could also, apparently, weep convincingly to a reporter about how worried he was. 2 officers came to the cafe. Simone handled them at the door. She was polite, thorough, and immovable. When the officers left, Aveline told Simone everything. She started with the beginning, how she'd met Hartwell when she was 21. When her father Gabriel was drowning in debt and Hartwell had presented himself as a solution. How the relationship had felt like rescue at first. How rescue had slowly become ownership. "He gave me $500 a week," Aveline said. "My own husband, $500. I wasn't allowed to have my own bank account. If I wanted something, I had to ask. If I asked too many times, there would be consequences." "What kind of consequences?" Simone asked, pen steady. Aveline was quiet for a moment. 2 years ago, I told him I wanted to go back to work. I had a degree. I had skills. He told me that working wives made him look like a failure." She paused. "When I pushed back, he pushed first." Simone looked up from her notepad. "There was a doctor," Aveline continued. "A Dr. Pierce. He's the one Hartwell uses for everything. He filed it as an accidental fall. I had 2 fractured ribs." Simone wrote it down. She didn't flinch. "Affairs. Lisette, she's in Charlotte. Before her there was Amanda. Before Amanda there was Claire. And before Claire," Aveline stopped, took a breath. "Diane, his current business partner's wife." Simone set her pen down. "Okay," she said quietly, "here's what we're going to do." The strategy was simple in concept and brutal in execution. Hartwell had spent the night controlling the narrative. They were going to take it back, publicly, precisely, and before he had time to build any more walls around himself. The next morning, Aveline stood in front of a small group of journalists in Colombia. She had slept 2 hours. She was still wearing borrowed clothes. Her hair was pulled back and her hands were clasped in front of her, and she looked directly into the cameras like she had been waiting her entire adult life to do exactly this. "My name is Aveline Cortes Crane," she said. Last night, my husband of 12 years called me a placeholder in front of 200 people. He was right that I was temporary. He was wrong about what that means. I'm not temporary because I wasn't good enough. I'm temporary because I decided to stop pretending. She named the financial control. She named the isolation. She named Lisette without hesitation and the names before her. She didn't cry. She didn't perform. She just told the truth plainly, like someone reading out evidence, because that's exactly what it was. By noon, Hash Her Truth was the top trending topic in South Carolina. By evening, it had spread to 3 more states. Former employees of Hartwell's came forward. 2 women, one in Greenville, one in Charlotte, reached out to Simone's office with stories that mirrored Aveline's so closely it made her stomach turn. She wasn't the first. She was just the first one he'd underestimated enough to call a placeholder out loud. Hartwell's response came fast and hard. His attorney filed a countersuit accusing Aveline of conspiring with Rowan Voss and fabricating abuse allegations for financial gain. His PR team released a statement describing Aveline as a woman in emotional crisis, who had been influenced by a dangerous third party. And then he did the thing that nearly broke her all over again. He had her father arrested. Gabriel Cortes was taken into custody in Greenville on charges of fraud, embezzlement, and tax evasion. The charges were real enough to stick, at least temporarily, and Hartwell knew exactly what he was doing. He wasn't just attacking Gabriel. He was attacking Aveline's ability to stay standing. She got the call from Rowan at 6 in the evening. "Aveline, I need you to listen to me. They arrested my father, Rowan. I know. He's 71 years old. He has a heart condition. Aveline," his voice was steady, not cold, steady. The way a wall is steady when everything else is moving. "This is what he does. This is the play. He can't come at you directly anymore because you've already gone public. So he goes sideways. He finds the thing that will make you want to stop and he uses it. It's my father. I know. And we are going to get him out. But if you stop now, if you pull back or go quiet or try to negotiate, you lose everything you've built in the last 24 hours. And your father will still be in that cell because Hartwell will have no reason to let him go." She was silent for a long time. "What would you do?" she finally asked. Rowan was quiet for a moment. "I'd be furious," he said, "and then I'd keep going." "If you were Aveline right now, would you keep fighting or try to negotiate for your father's release? Tell me in the comments." She kept going. 3 days later, a man named Preston Whitmore walked into Simone's office in Columbia carrying a leather portfolio and 12 years of suppressed guilt. Preston had been Hartwell's business partner until 4 years ago, when a disagreement over a deal had ended with Preston quietly pushed out and a non-disclosure agreement stuffed into his hands. He'd signed it. He'd gone home. He'd spent 4 years telling himself it wasn't his problem. Then he saw Aveline's press conference. "I have emails," Preston said, sitting across from Simone with the portfolio open on the table. "Wire transfers. I have documentation of $400,000 paid to municipal officials in Columbia and Charleston for expedited building permits. I have the names of the officials. I have dates, amounts, account numbers." Simone looked at the documents for a very long time. "Mr. Whitmore," she said finally, "I need you to understand that the moment you walk out of this office, this cannot be undone." "I know," he said, "that's why I'm here." Federal investigators in Atlanta opened a full investigation within 72 hours of receiving Preston's documentation. Forensic accountants began pulling apart Hartwell's financial records. What they found wasn't just $400,000 in bribes. It was a 12-year pattern of fraud, money laundering, and what the lead investigator would later describe in court as one of the most deliberately constructed financial deception operations we've seen in this region. Hartwell, sensing the walls closing in, made one final move. He requested a meeting with Aveline. His attorneys communicated through Simone that he had information about Gabriel, information that could significantly worsen her father's legal situation, unless Aveline agreed to speak with him privately and discuss terms. It was blackmail. Everyone in the room knew it. "He wants you scared and isolated," Rowan said. "Don't give him either." "I'm not going alone," Aveline said. "You won't be." The meeting happened in a conference room in downtown Charleston with 2 witnesses, a recording device, and Simone sitting 3 feet away. Hartwell came in with his attorney and the practiced ease of a man who had never once in his life been held accountable for anything. He sat across from Aveline and looked at her the way he always had, like she was a problem he was patiently solving. "You've made a mess," he said. "I've made a record," she replied. He slid a folder across the table. Inside were financial documents, bank statements, transaction records, a photograph, all allegedly linking Gabriel Cortes to a series of crimes far more serious than the original charges. Aveline didn't touch the folder. "Those are forged," she said. Something flickered across Hartwell's face. Not quite surprise, more like recalculation. "Drop the case," he said. "Settle quietly, take $2 million and walk away. Your father goes free, this all disappears, and we both move on." Aveline looked at him for a long moment. 12 years of his face. 12 years of shrinking herself to fit inside the space he was willing to give her. "No," she said. She stood up. "We're done here." Within 48 hours, Rowan's forensic team had confirmed what Aveline already knew. The documents were fabricated. Photo timestamps had been manipulated. Transaction records showed metadata inconsistencies that no competent forger had bothered to clean up. Simone drafted a statement that afternoon accusing Hartwell of blackmail, evidence tampering, and obstruction of justice. The statement went public the same day. The federal grand jury in Atlanta handed down a 14-count indictment against Hartwell Crane: fraud, bribery, money laundering, racketeering. The full sweep of 12 years, reduced to a list of charges that a federal prosecutor read aloud in a courtroom while Hartwell sat at a table in a very expensive suit and stared at the table. His attorneys came to Simone the next morning with a plea deal. 8 years, reduced charges, cooperation with broader corruption investigations in exchange for Hartwell's testimony against several of the officials he'd bribed. Simone sat across from Aveline and laid it out plainly. 8 years, he'd likely serve 6, quiet, no extended trial, no more of this being dragged through the public every day. Aveline was quiet for a long moment. "What happens to all the women who came after me? The employees, the partners, the people he's still connected to? Do they get their story told if he takes a deal?" Simone didn't answer immediately, because she knew the answer. "No," Aveline said, "I want the trial." The trial lasted 11 days. Aveline testified on day 4. She walked into that courtroom in Atlanta in a dark blazer and flat shoes, no jewelry, and took the stand like she had been preparing for this moment for 12 years, because in a way she had. The defense attorney tried everything. He questioned her memory. He implied she was motivated by financial gain. He brought up her father's legal troubles. He referenced Rowan Voss no fewer than 6 times, trying to paint her as a woman being used by a more powerful man to destroy an innocent one. Aveline answered every question in the same steady voice. "Mrs. Crane." "Ms. Cortes," she corrected, every single time. The prosecution played recordings. They showed wire transfers. They entered Preston Whitmore's documentation into evidence and let the numbers speak for themselves. Former employees testified about a culture of intimidation. One of the municipal officials Hartwell had bribed offered his own deal, corroborated everything. The jury deliberated for 3 days. Guilty, all 14 counts. The courtroom didn't erupt. There were no dramatic outbursts. Aveline sat very still and felt something in her chest, something that had been clenched tight for 12 years, finally, quietly let go. Hartwell Crane was sentenced to 17 years in federal prison. The judge, before announcing the sentence, looked directly at Hartwell and said something that would be quoted in every article written about the case for years afterward. You used every system available to you, legal, financial, social, and personal, to keep another human being small. This court will not do the same. The divorce settlement had already been finalized separately, $22 million, and a penthouse in Savannah that Aveline had never seen. Hartwell had agreed to it the week before the verdict, when it became clear that fighting it would only add more to the public record. Aveline drove to the federal holding facility 2 days before Hartwell was transferred to serve his sentence. She hadn't planned to go. She'd told herself she didn't need to. But something pulled her there, not for closure exactly, but for clarity. She was shown into a visitation room. Hartwell was already seated when she arrived, in a gray jumpsuit that somehow still looked like something he'd chosen deliberately. He looked older, not broken, just older. They sat across from each other, without speaking for almost a full minute. "Why are you here?" he finally asked. "I'm not sure," she said honestly. "I think I wanted to see you without the suit." He looked at her steadily. "I did what I was built to do," he said. "I acquired, I controlled, I protected my assets." A pause. "You were an asset." "I know," Aveline said. "That was always the problem." She stood up. "I want you to know something, Hartwell. I'm not angry at you anymore. I was for a long time, but you know what got me to the other side of it." She looked at him. "I stopped waiting for you to admit you were wrong. I stopped needing that. That's not forgiveness. That's just freedom." She left without looking back. Gabriel Cortes had been released 3 weeks earlier, the trumped-up charges dismissed once the federal case exposed the mechanism behind them. Aveline met him for lunch in Savannah, at a small cafe near the water. He looked smaller than she remembered, older. He stirred his coffee and couldn't quite meet her eyes. "I knew what he was," Gabriel said quietly. "Not at first, but after the first year I knew, and I stayed quiet because," he stopped, "because I was afraid of what he'd do, and because I told myself you were fine, that you had everything you needed." "I needed my father," Aveline said simply. He looked up at her then, and his eyes were full. "I know," he said. They sat there for a long time, not reconciled exactly, but beginning, which was more than Aveline had expected and more than enough for now. Rowan came into Aveline's life steadily, the way good things tend to, not with a declaration, but with consistency. He was there when she needed to think out loud. He was there when the trial coverage got brutal, and she needed someone who understood brutality without being consumed by it. He told her, one evening on the Savannah waterfront, about his own family. A mother who had spent years in a situation not entirely unlike Aveline's. A father he had spent most of his adult life trying not to become. The reason he'd started watching men like Hartwell in the first place. "You didn't rescue me," Aveline said. "No," he agreed. "You just made it possible to rescue myself." He looked at her. "That's all I ever wanted to do." The Cortes Foundation opened in Charleston 14 months after the night. Aveline walked out of the Harborview Grand in the rain. It offered legal aid, emergency housing, and financial literacy programs for survivors of domestic abuse across South Carolina and Georgia. Nadia, who had given Aveline dry clothes and hot tea and no questions at the worst moment of her life, became the foundation's community outreach coordinator. Gabriel volunteered every Tuesday and Thursday, driving women to appointments and sitting in waiting rooms, and doing the quiet, unglamorous work of someone trying to pay a debt they know they can never fully repay. At the Foundation's opening event, held, deliberately, in Charleston, Aveline stood in front of a room full of women and said the thing she most needed someone to say to her 12 years ago. "Nobody is coming to save you," she said. "I know that's not what you want to hear. I know you want someone to tell you it gets easier, that help is on the way, that you just have to hold on a little longer." She paused. "Help exists. People exist who will stand beside you. But the actual moment things change, that only comes when you decide that what's happening to you is not the rest of your life." Another pause. "I decided that in a hotel ballroom with no shoes and a broken necklace and rain coming down outside. And I would make that same decision 1,000 times again." The room was very quiet. "Choose yourself," she said, "even when it's terrifying, especially then." She had walked out of the Harborview Grand with nothing. No shoes, no phone, no plan, no certainty about what came next. She had walked into a cafe where a stranger gave her tea. She had listened to a man who offered options instead of pity. She had sat across from an attorney who took notes without flinching. She had stood at a podium and told the truth with shaking hands. She had refused a deal that would have made her life quieter and smaller and easier. She had gone to trial. She had testified. She had won. And somewhere in the middle of all of it, somewhere between the press conference and the verdict, and the lunch with her father and the evening on the waterfront, she had stopped being the woman Hartwell Crane had made her and started being the woman she actually was. Not a placeholder. Never again. If this story moved you, hit subscribe. There's a lot more where this came from. Like this video, drop a comment telling me what moment hit you the hardest, and share it with someone who needs to hear it today.